The man who would come to be known as the Night Stalker was born Ricardo Leiva Muñoz Ramirez on February the 29th, 1960, in El Paso, Texas. His beginnings did not hint at the notoriety that would one day surround his name. He was the youngest of 5 children, born into a working-class Mexican-American family. His father, Julian Ramirez, was a former Mexican police officer who had moved the family to the United States seeking a better life. But what Julian brought with him was a violent temper and a rigid sense of discipline that defined the atmosphere of the Ramirez home. Julian worked long hours on the Santa Fe Railroad and came home angry, exhausted, and volatile. His punishments were physical, often brutal. Neighbors later recalled hearing shouting, the sound of belts, and children crying. Richard, quiet and watchful, absorbed it all. From an early age, he retreated inward, the kind of child who stayed in the corners of rooms, observing, memorizing. When he was still in grade school, he began to experience temporal lobe seizures, the result of repeated head injuries. The first came when a dresser fell on him as a toddler. The second, after being struck in the head with a swing. The seizures went untreated, and their effects compounded. Blackouts, sudden bursts of rage, and strange dissociative episodes. These neurological injuries would later be cited by psychologists as early indicators of a damaged impulse control system. One that, combined with his environment, would form the scaffolding of his future violence. As a child, Richard sought escape from his father's temper by sleeping in a local cemetery. It became a refuge, a place where the silence felt safer than the chaos at home. He developed an early fascination with death, not in a ritualistic or symbolic sense at first, but as something calm, inevitable, even peaceful. By adolescence, that fascination had deepened. He was quiet but not shy, withdrawn but observant. In school, he struggled academically and socially. Teachers described him as polite but distant. He rarely smiled, rarely engaged. At home, the beatings continued, and the growing hostility between his parents deepened the household tension. When Richard turned 12, his world changed. His older cousin Miguel, Mike Ramirez, returned from Vietnam. Mike was a decorated veteran, charismatic, tough, and deeply disturbed. He was also a murderer. During the war, he had tortured and killed enemy combatants, photographing their mutilated corpses as trophies. To young Richard, Mike represented everything his father wasn't: powerful, fearless, in control. Mike would sit in the living room, showing the boy Polaroids of women he claimed to have raped and killed. He spoke about it casually, like war stories. He taught Richard how to handle guns, how to stalk quietly, how to kill efficiently. Mike became his mentor, his role model, the first person Richard truly admired. In May of 1973, when Richard was 13, he watched as Mike shot and killed his wife Jessie in front of him during an argument. The act was sudden, unfiltered violence, the kind of act that sears itself into memory. The police took Mike away, but the damage was irreversible. Richard had seen death made casual, quick, and unpunished. After the murder, he changed. Teachers noticed he became withdrawn, darker. He began skipping school and spending his nights wandering El Paso's streets. He started stealing, first small things, then cars. He drifted into petty crime. Around this time, he discovered marijuana and LSD, which blurred his already fragile sense of reality. He also began working part-time at a local Holiday Inn. There, his impulses first surfaced. He used a master key to enter rooms, stealing valuables and, on at least one occasion, attempting to assault a woman while her husband was away. The man returned unexpectedly, beating Richard severely and sparing him a criminal record only because the couple declined to press charges. It was a moment that could have altered his trajectory. Instead, it only deepened his belief that he could act without consequence. When Mike was eventually released from a mental hospital in 1977, Richard reconnected with him. The two spent time together again, but now Richard was old enough to absorb more. The weapons, the stories, the world view. Mike continued to glorify violence, teaching him about Satanism, survival, and domination. That same year, Richard dropped out of school and left home permanently. He was 17. He began moving between relatives, drifting from job to job, eventually heading to California. In Los Angeles, he found anonymity. It was the late 1970s, a city teetering between glamour and decay, a place of neon lights, drugs, and growing crime. Richard fit in perfectly among the transient youth who haunted bus stations and cheap motels. He started using cocaine and developed a dependency on hard drugs. His petty thefts escalated into burglaries. During this period, his criminal behavior began to take on ritualistic undertones. He started breaking into homes not just for valuables, but to linger, to observe, to trespass on other people's safety. He would stand in dark rooms and watch people sleep, taking small items as mementos. He also began studying Satanism more seriously, though his understanding was superficial. A blend of biblical rebellion and personal justification. For Ramirez, Satanism offered identity and defiance. It allowed him to invert everything that had made him powerless as a child. Instead of fearing evil, he could become it. By the early 1980s, Ramirez was living between Los Angeles and San Francisco, surviving on theft and burglaries. He was arrested several times for car theft, possession of marijuana, and burglary, but never served significant jail time. Each arrest seemed to reinforce his confidence that the system couldn't touch him. Psychologists later noted that his crimes followed a classic behavioral trajectory: early trauma, neurological damage, exposure to violence, substance abuse, and antisocial reinforcement. But at the time, Ramirez was simply another drifter. Tall, thin, with long hair and decaying teeth, spending his nights in bus stations and flop houses. He was fascinated by horror films and true crime stories. He read about serial killers like Jack the Ripper and Ted Bundy, internalizing their notoriety as power. He began to see murder as a form of control, the ultimate assertion of dominance over another person's fate. In 1983, Ramirez committed his first known violent assault in Pasadena, attacking a woman during a burglary. She survived, and the crime went unsolved. He moved frequently, often staying in cheap hotels paid for with stolen credit cards. His habits were developing. He preferred nighttime crimes, entry through unlocked windows, and using knives or guns interchangeably. He carried a fascination with electricity. The flicker of street lights, the hum of neon, the way Los Angeles glowed even at midnight. Ramirez had no fixed residence, no stable job, no consistent relationships. His family in Texas had largely cut contact. He was drifting deeper into isolation, his only constants being theft, drugs, and a growing fixation on death. The early 1980s were also a time of transformation in Los Angeles. A city expanding rapidly, its police force stretched thin. Crime rates were high, and the culture of fear was rising. Ramirez was invisible in this chaos, one of thousands of transient criminals moving unseen through the city's cracks. By 1984, the elements that defined his later crimes were all in place. Nocturnal intrusion, sexual violence, and the ritualized invocation of satanic imagery. The psychological distance between theft and murder had eroded. That year, on June 28, 1984, Ramirez committed his first known murder. His victim was Jenny Vinco, a 79-year-old woman living in Glassell Park. He entered her home through an unlocked window, sexually assaulted her, and stabbed her repeatedly before slashing her throat so deeply that she was nearly decapitated. Her son discovered the body the next morning. The brutality shocked investigators. There was no clear motive, nothing of significant value stolen, no connection to the victim. It was random, senseless, and frenzied. The crime bore signs of sexual compulsion and rage, but also control. The killer had lingered. The murder of Jenny Vinco marked a threshold. From that point, Ramirez's crimes would escalate rapidly. In the months that followed, he continued his burglaries, traveling between Los Angeles and San Francisco. But his violence became more deliberate. He began targeting victims of varying ages, races, and neighborhoods, focusing on opportunity rather than type. Detectives at the time had no idea the city was on the brink of a reign of terror that would last more than a year. For Ramirez, the Vinco murder was a beginning, the point at which theft merged fully with homicide and his fantasies became acts. In his mind, he had crossed an invisible line and felt empowered by it. He continued to roam the city at night, sometimes walking for hours along freeways and through neighborhoods, observing homes and testing doors. His habits were erratic but purposeful. The darkness was his cover, the city's noise, his camouflage. By the end of 1984, the Night Stalker, though the name had not yet been coined, was beginning to take shape. In the early months of 1985, Los Angeles was a city teetering between summer heat and rising fear. Burglary and homicide detectives worked cases around the clock, but what they couldn't yet see was that a single man was responsible for a string of crimes that seemed to defy logic, pattern, and motive. The killings were random in every sense: geography, age, race, method. Yet beneath the chaos was a chilling consistency. Nighttime entry, extreme violence, and a signature of sadism that escalated with every attack. After the murder of Jenny Vinco in June 1984, Richard Ramirez had disappeared back into the sprawl of Los Angeles. For months, nothing connected him to any other crimes. But by March 1985, he returned to killing. That month, Dale Okazaki, 34, was murdered in her Rosemead apartment, and her roommate, Maria Hernandez, survived after being shot in the face while entering the garage. Minutes later, another woman, Tsai Lian Veronica Yu, was pulled from her car and shot to death. The proximity of the crime suggested one offender moving quickly, impulsively. When investigators compared ballistics, they realized the same gun, a .22 caliber handgun, had been used in both incidents. 2 hours apart, 2 different neighborhoods. The media seized on the randomness. Residents began locking windows, buying guns, sleeping with lights on. Over the next several months, Ramirez's crimes became more frequent and more vicious. He invaded homes across Los Angeles County, Monterey Park, Arcadia, Whittier, Burbank, and Mission Viejo, among others. His victims were men, women, and children, ranging in age from 6 to 80. The attacks involved shooting, stabbing, beating, and sexual assault. Some victims were killed immediately. Others were left alive, sometimes told to tell the police the Night Stalker was here. This was how the name took hold. The media, desperate for a label, borrowed it from a recent television movie about another killer. The Night Stalker fit perfectly. A predator emerging only in darkness, choosing victims without pattern, moving unseen through a city of millions. Ramirez's methods were as chaotic as they were methodical. He preferred homes near freeways, allowing him to escape quickly. He often used stolen cars, abandoning them after each attack. He carried duct tape, rope, and handguns, sometimes a knife. His victims described a tall, gaunt man with decayed teeth and a black cap, eyes dark and unblinking. Those who survived recalled a smell, sweat, gunpowder, and decay that lingered after he left. In one case, he shot Vincent Zazara, 64, and then murdered his wife Maxine, mutilating her body post-mortem. In another, he bound and raped Lai Leung, 63, before killing her husband. He forced victims to swear to Satan. He drew pentagrams on walls and on their bodies, leaving behind symbols that amplified the growing public hysteria. While Ramirez invoked satanic imagery, it was less religious devotion than performance, a psychological armor. He had come to see himself as an instrument of darkness, a chosen emissary of chaos. For him, each murder reinforced that identity. By the summer of 1985, panic spread through Los Angeles and the neighboring counties. Gun sales surged. Locksmiths were booked for weeks. The newspapers ran daily updates. The police, now involving both the Los Angeles County Sheriff's Department and the Los Angeles Police Department, formed a special task force. At first, the task force struggled. The randomness of Ramirez's targets made profiling nearly impossible. He left inconsistent evidence. A shoe print here, a fingerprint there, but no clear connection. But as the attacks increased, the evidence began to accumulate. One of the first significant clues came from a shoe print. A rare Avia sneaker model, size 11.5, found outside several crime scenes. Investigators traced the model and discovered that only one pair of that size had been sold in Los Angeles County. Whoever wore them had left an unmistakable trail. Then came a breakthrough. In one of the stolen cars Ramirez had abandoned, police recovered a fingerprint lifted from a rearview mirror. The print matched Richard Ramirez, a drifter with prior arrests for car theft and drugs. His photograph was circulated internally among law enforcement. But before police could move, Ramirez struck again. This time in Mission Viejo, on August 24, 1985. He attacked Bill and Inez Romero in their home, shooting Bill and assaulting Inez. This time, a young witness saw his car and noted the license plate. The vehicle was found abandoned in Los Angeles. Inside were fingerprints, matching those of Ramirez once again. When police released his name and photograph to the public on August 29, 1985, the manhunt exploded. His mugshot appeared on front pages across California. The Night Stalker now had a face. Ramirez didn't yet know he'd been identified. 2 days later, he boarded a bus from Tucson, Arizona, back to Los Angeles, unaware that his image was plastered on newspapers across the state. When he arrived, he noticed people staring at him. At a convenience store, he saw his face on the front page of the Los Angeles Times. Panic set in. He fled on foot, running through East Los Angeles, trying to carjack vehicles, threatening drivers. But this time, the city fought back. Residents recognized him and surrounded him. He was chased through the streets, struck with metal rods and fists until police arrived. When officers pulled him from the mob, he reportedly shouted, "Thank God you came, or they would have killed me." The reign of the Night Stalker was over. In the aftermath, the city exhaled collectively. The arrest brought a strange mixture of relief and disbelief. That one man, operating mostly alone, had managed to terrorize millions. In total, Ramirez was linked to 13 murders, 5 attempted murders, 11 sexual assaults, and 14 burglaries, though the true count may never be known. His trial began in 1988 and would become one of the most publicized in California history. Ramirez entered the courtroom with a smirk, dressed in black, occasionally flashing a pentagram drawn on his palm. He shouted, "Hail Satan!" to reporters and made eye contact with the families of victims, relishing the spectacle. The courtroom atmosphere was volatile. Spectators lined up hours in advance to attend hearings. Some came out of morbid curiosity. Others came to witness what evil looked like up close. Disturbingly, Ramirez began receiving letters from admirers, mostly young women, who romanticized him as a dark, mysterious figure. Throughout the proceedings, his demeanor remained detached. He rarely showed emotion. The prosecution presented overwhelming evidence: fingerprints, ballistic matches, shoe prints, eyewitness testimony, and stolen items found in his possession. The defense tried to argue diminished capacity due to drug use and mental illness, but the jury was unmoved. On September 20th, 1989, after 4 years of proceedings, the jury found Richard Ramirez guilty on 43 counts, including 13 murders. During sentencing, he smiled and said, "Big deal. Death always went with the territory. See you in Disneyland." He was sentenced to death in California's gas chamber and transferred to San Quentin State Prison, where he would spend the rest of his life on death row. Inside, Ramirez maintained a strange aura of fame. He gave occasional interviews, portraying himself as misunderstood, defiant, and loyal to Satan. He never expressed genuine remorse. Over time, his notoriety attracted a subculture of admirers, the so-called serial killer groupies. One of them, Doreen Leoy, a freelance magazine editor, began writing to him regularly. In 1996, she married him in a small ceremony inside the prison. Forensic psychologists who studied Ramirez described him as a classic antisocial personality. Narcissistic, devoid of empathy, with a deep need for control. His crimes were not acts of passion but of power. Each one reinforced his self-image as the embodiment of evil, an identity formed from years of abuse, neglect, and psychological distortion. In his later years, Ramirez became reclusive. His health declined due to chronic substance abuse and hepatitis C. In 2013, before his death sentence could be carried out, he died of complications related to B-cell lymphoma at the age of 53. Even in death, the myth of the Night Stalker persisted. The case continued to fascinate criminologists, psychologists, and the public, not only for the brutality of the crimes, but for the portrait it painted of moral and psychological collapse. Unlike many serial killers, Ramirez did not kill for money, revenge, or even sexual gratification alone. His motive was existential: to assert power in a world where he had grown up powerless. In interviews, He often dismissed the concept of morality as meaningless, claiming that we are all evil in some form. For law enforcement, the case became a landmark in interagency cooperation and forensic investigation. The use of fingerprint databases, ballistic tracing, and cross-county collaboration were still evolving tools in the 1980s. The Night Stalker investigation helped expose the need for centralized data systems, a foundation that later shaped modern criminal tracking. For Los Angeles, the summer of 1985 remained a scar. The fear had been collective. It changed how people lived, how they locked their doors, how they viewed safety in their own homes. It was a moment when the illusion of security broke down completely. In the years after Ramirez's death, documentaries, books, and series revisited his crimes repeatedly. Yet each retelling returned to the same central truth: that the Night Stalker was not a supernatural figure, not a monster born whole, but a human being shaped by violence, neglect, and moral disintegration. Psychologists later argued that understanding killers like Ramirez isn't about excusing them. It's about tracing how ordinary variables can converge into something extraordinary and horrific. The cycle of abuse, brain injury, social alienation, and unaddressed psychopathy, all of it formed a blueprint of destruction. Richard Ramirez's story, stripped of mythology, is the anatomy of dehumanization. It begins with a child in a violent home, watching others harm without consequence, and ends with a man who learned to find identity in that harm. He left no ideology, no coherent philosophy, only devastation, the empty legacy of a life consumed by cruelty. The Night Stalker died behind bars, but the echo of what he did, the fear he created, the lives he destroyed, still resonates. His name remains shorthand for a very specific kind of terror, the random, unreasoning violence that can emerge from the shadows of an ordinary city. If you found this story compelling, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe for more deep dives into the minds and moments that shaped history's darkest figures. Every week, we open another case, another file, another glimpse into the shadows.